Welcome to Season 5 of Pants Around Ankles Prevention, where my mission is to help you keep your pants securely buckled and avoid that unexpected, awkward, and embarrassing moment when you realize suddenly that they're not. This season, we're going to do things a little differently with shorts around ankles prevention. Quick, power-packed episodes designed to deliver a punch of truth to help you wake up to a new perspective. Let's see what today's short has in store. Damn it, Margaret Atwood. As I work to become a writer, I have focused more on reading what others have written about writing, like this. The only way you can write the truth is to assume that what you set down will never be read, not by any other person and not even by yourself at some later date. Otherwise, you begin excusing yourself. Margaret Atwood. Ouch. Somewhere in a prior episode here, I believe I've shared that the purpose of my writing is for me to better understand who I am, who I'm becoming, and who I want to become. And if you benefit along the way, that's great. But actually publishing what I'm writing requires a greater precision in what I say than if I write in a journal or something like that, where nobody else but me is going to see it. And to achieve that greater precision, I need to understand my thoughts and what's behind them with greater clarity. Bingo. There are a number of things that seem to be conspiring against this. First, I've discovered that excusing yourself, to use Margaret's words, comes in layers. One level of this is the basic imposter syndrome. The idea of, who am I to think that I have something of value to say to the world? It's a real thing for most anyone who's growing. It doesn't just affect writers. Whether you're a business owner, a mid-level manager, a stay-at-home mom, pretty much anything in between, if you're growing and trying to wake up, then imposter syndrome is something that you most likely have to contend with. And the most common fear is that people will discover that we don't know what we're doing. And of course, as you probably know, we don't. In my case, this fear is something I'm no longer willing to indulge. If I have a hope for you as a reader, it's that you will find what I'm writing to be authentic and vulnerable, and that by doing that, it will awaken something in you that you will decide to respond to. But this is kind of the easy level of excusing yourself to identify and, if you wish, to address. The more difficult layer is excusing yourself for not being willing to say the things we are afraid to say to ourselves. Margaret also talked about writing the truth, and for me, the truth is not a relative sort of thing, it's an absolute. For something to be a valid truth, it needs to be true for everyone, regardless of their circumstances. My goal, actually, is not to do that. For me, the overriding question is not what is the truth, but what is useful. And having said that, to explore the things that I want to avoid is a much tougher layer of excusing yourself to deal with. I'm not even sure I know what those things are. And if I'm blind to them, how do you uncover them? You can't wake yourself up when you're asleep. So I'm reminded of a quote by the late Jim Rohn that's been popularized by Tony Robbins. Success leaves clues. In the same way, I think the things we are blind to also leaves clues. And those we should be able to look for and find. So what would those clues look like? Anger, frustration, anxiety. I'm sure those others, but I think these represent a pretty fertile field. Now, while I'm sure none of you suffer from any of those things, I do. And as I think about it, there are things that I find frustrating, anger-producing, anxiety-generating that did those same things to me 50 years ago. Oops. So for sure, those are clues, and not very subtle ones either. There are so many things that can trigger one of these emotional responses in me, but most of them can be summarized this way. I want the world to be a certain way, and it isn't. And I am refusing, consciously or otherwise, to accept that. So these are all grounded in lack of acceptance. Now, acceptance is not necessarily, lack of acceptance is not necessarily a bad thing. I remember reading years ago a book in which the author pointed out that anger can be healthy. It can be the result of a passionate desire for things to be better and different than they are. That's lack of acceptance. So something like that's not grounded in some selfish, self-centered perspective. So while some of my emotional responses may be selfless, some of them are also self-centered. Trying to keep the appropriate perspective and balance requires some effort. And I can already hear self-talk excuses floating into my awareness around all of this. And if that's the case, then focusing on the clues was the solution to bringing what I was asleep to into my awareness, which is another small step of waking up. If excuses leave clues, then so does anything else that is out of your awareness that you're avoiding. So instead of ending with some neat insight, I'm going to leave you with a single, broader question. It's the same one that I'm dealing with myself. What will you have to face if you stop excusing yourself? If you'd like a deeper dive into this topic, consider subscribing to our newsletter, Waking Up, where we will explore it in even more detail. And if you found this episode helpful, be sure to subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode. See you soon.